Commander Alice Stone stood at the bridge of the ESS Defiant, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the last transmission from Proxima Centauri V. The colony's final distress signal played on repeat, a grim reminder of humanity's desperate situation. She watched as the red dots representing Drachnid ships overwhelmed the blue markers of Earth's defense fleet. "Status report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the weight pressing down on her shoulders. Lieutenant Peter Nash looked up from his tactical station, his face pale but determined. "The colony's defenses have fallen. We lost contact with the remaining ground forces 10 minutes ago. The Drachnid fleet is already changing course. They're heading toward Earth." The bridge fell silent. After 3 years of fighting, humanity's last outer colony had fallen to the alien empire that had already conquered most of the known galaxy. Earth stood alone now. Alice took a deep breath, her fingers drumming against the command chair's armrest. The Drachnids had seemed unstoppable since they first appeared at the edges of human space. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, and their shields nearly impenetrable. Every victory humanity managed to scratch out came at a terrible cost. "Commander," Maria Rodriguez called from the engineering station, "Fleet Command is requesting an immediate conference with all remaining ship captains." Alice nodded. "Put them through to my ready room." She turned to her second-in-command. "Lieutenant Nash, you have the bridge." In her ready room, the faces of the remaining fleet captains appeared on the screen. Some she had known for years, others were recent promotions, replacements for those who hadn't survived recent battles. Admiral Chen's weathered face took center screen. "I'll be brief," the Admiral said. "The Proxima Centauri colony is lost. Our analysts estimate we have 3 weeks before the main Drachnid fleet reaches Earth's defense perimeter. We're implementing Protocol Omega." A collective breath caught in the throats of everyone in the conference. Protocol Omega was the last resort, a fighting retreat to Earth while evacuating as many civilians as possible from the remaining outposts. "Commander Stone," the Admiral continued, "the ESS Defiant will coordinate the civilian evacuation from the Mars colonies. Captain Miller, your ships will cover the mining stations in the asteroid belt. The rest of you, form a defensive line at Jupiter's orbit. We need to buy Earth as much time as possible." Alice listened as the Admiral assigned the remaining tasks. Of the once proud Earth defense fleet, barely 30% of their ships remained operational. They all knew the odds. The Drachnids had never failed to conquer a civilization they targeted. The meeting ended, and Alice returned to the bridge. Her crew looked at her expectantly, their faces showing a mix of fear and determination. "Set course for Mars," she ordered. "Maximum speed. And get me a direct line to the colonial governor." As the ESS Defiant accelerated toward the red planet, Alice watched Earth growing smaller on the view screen. The blue marble that held everything humanity had built over thousands of years now faced its greatest threat. The weight of her responsibility pressed down on her, but she refused to give in to despair. The Drachnids might have superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but they had never faced humans before. And if there was one thing Alice knew about her species, it was their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even in the darkest of times. "They think they've won," she muttered to herself as her ship streaked through space. "They think we'll give up now that our colonies have fallen. But they don't know humans very well, do they?" The ESS Defiant's engines pulsed bright blue against the darkness of space, carrying hope with them, even as the shadow of extinction loomed over Earth. The real fight was just beginning. Kevin Wright wiped the sweat from his forehead as he studied the strange markings on the cave wall. The young science officer had been exploring the lesser-known caverns of Mars for 3 days now, hoping to find something, anything, that might help humanity's desperate situation. The evacuation of the Mars colonies was almost complete, but he had convinced Commander Stone to let him stay just a little longer. "This is different," he muttered, running his gloved hand over the metallic symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint blue light. Unlike the usual Martian cave markings they'd discovered during colonization, These had a different pattern, a different energy signature. His suit radio crackled. "Officer Wright, you have 30 minutes before the last transport leaves." Lieutenant Nash's voice came through. "Commander's orders." "Understood," Kevin replied, but he barely heard himself speak. His eyes had locked onto something behind the glowing symbols, a slight depression in the wall that shouldn't have been there. He pressed his hand against it, and the wall slid away with a soft hiss. Kevin's heart nearly stopped. Beyond the hidden door lay a chamber filled with advanced technology, clearly not of human origin. But it wasn't Drachnid either. The design was completely different, more elegant somehow. "Lieutenant Nash," he called into his radio, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get Commander Stone. She needs to see this." 20 minutes later, Commander Stone stood beside him in the chamber, her flashlight beam dancing across walls covered in holographic displays. Dr. Susan Martinez, the ship's xenobiologist, moved from panel to panel, her eyes wide with excitement. "This is incredible," Susan said, her fingers flying over a control surface. "This facility, it's some kind of research station. The species who built it were studying the Drachnids long before we encountered them." Alice Stone's expression remained focused. "Can you read any of it?" Susan nodded slowly. "Some of it. The language structure is similar to other ancient alien writings we've discovered. They were conducting biological research on the Drachnids, studying their physiological weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" Alice's voice sharpened. "The Drachnids have conquered half the galaxy. Nobody's found a weakness yet." Kevin moved to another panel, brushing dust from its surface. As he did, a hologram sprang to life in the center of the chamber. It showed a Drachnid ship, but something was wrong with its crew. They seemed to be struggling, their movements erratic. "Look at this," Susan called out, pointing to a stream of data. "The Drachnids. Their neural networks depend on a specific type of radiation. Without it, their higher brain functions begin to fail." "Can we use that?" Alice asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in weeks. "Maybe," Susan replied, "but this data is heavily encrypted. We'd need time to decode it properly, understand exactly how it works." "Time is something we don't have," Alice said grimly. "The main Drachnid fleet will reach Earth's defense perimeter in less than 3 weeks. Kevin looked up from another console. "Commander, we can't leave this. This might be our only chance." Alice was quiet for a moment, then reached for her radio. "This is Commander Stone. Relay the evacuation orders for Science Team Alpha. I need a secure data link to the ESS Defiant and every piece of decryption software we have." She turned to Kevin and Susan. "You have 48 hours. Make them count." As they worked through the night, surrounded by the ghostly blue glow of alien technology, Kevin couldn't help but smile. The Drachnids thought they had humanity beaten, but they'd never considered that their greatest weakness might have been discovered millennia ago, waiting in a dusty cave on Mars for someone desperate enough to find it. Susan Martinez rubbed her tired eyes as another decryption attempt failed. For 36 hours straight, she and Kevin had been working on the alien data, trying to understand exactly how the Drachnids' neural networks could be disrupted. Time was running out, and they both knew it. "The encryption is like nothing I've ever seen," Kevin said, staring at his screen. "It's not just complex, it's adaptive. Every time we crack one layer, it changes the next." The radio crackled with Commander Stone's voice. "Dr. Martinez, we've got company. 3 Drachnid scout ships just entered the asteroid belt. Lieutenant Nash is leading them away, but you need to hurry." Susan looked at the progress bar on her tablet. 43% decoded. Not enough. Not nearly enough. She reached for her coffee, only to find the cup empty. "I need help," she admitted. "We need someone who thinks differently." "Someone who?" She stopped, an idea forming. "Commander, is Dr. John Carter still aboard?" "The AI specialist." "Yes, he's helping coordinate the civilian evacuation." "Why?" "Get him here. Now." 30 minutes later, John Carter stood in the ancient chamber, his eyes moving rapidly between the holographic displays. "Fascinating," he said. "The encryption isn't just adaptive. It's alive. It's an eye." "And I?" Kevin asked, looking up from his work. "The aliens who built this place," John explained, "they didn't just encrypt their data. They created an artificial intelligence to protect it. That's why it keeps changing. It's learning from our attempts to crack it." Out in space, the ESS Defiant played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Drachnid scouts. Lieutenant Nash had developed a risky but effective strategy, using the asteroid belt's dense fields to mask their movements, then launching brief, precise strikes before disappearing again. "Port thrusters, full power," Nash ordered. The ship swung around a massive asteroid, using its gravity to slingshot them away from pursuit. 2 Drachnid ships followed, their superior engines closing the gap. "They're charging weapons," a crew member called out. "Wait for it," Nash said calmly. 3, 2, 1. Now. Release the mining charges. The explosive charges they'd borrowed from the Mars colony detonated behind them, filling space with debris and radiation. The Drachnid ships pulled back, their sensors temporarily blinded. Back in the Martian chamber, John Carter had linked his portable quantum computer to the alien systems. "We need to stop trying to break the encryption," he said. "We need to communicate with it." Susan watched as John input a series of commands. The holographic displays flickered, then stabilized, showing new patterns. "There," John said, pointing to a stream of data. "The AI isn't just protecting the information. It's waiting for the right people to use it. It needs to know we won't misuse the knowledge." Kevin leaned forward. "How do we prove that?" "By showing it what's at stake," Susan said. She pulled up the latest footage from Earth's defense networks, showing the Drachnid fleet's advance, the fallen colonies, the refugees fleeing their homes. The chamber's lights pulsed, and suddenly the encryption began to fall away. Data streamed across their screens, detailed information about Drachnid biology, their dependence on specific radiation frequencies, and most importantly, how to disrupt them. "Commander," Susan called into her radio, her voice trembling with excitement. "We did it. We know how to stop them. But we're going to need every satellite in Earth's defense network, and we'll have to modify them all." "Whatever you need," Alice replied. "Just tell me it will work." Susan looked at the detailed plans now displayed before them. "It will work, Commander. But we have to hurry. We have less than 2 weeks to rewrite the future of humanity." The main lab of the ESS Defiant buzzed with activity as Susan Martinez explained their discovery to the gathered officers. She pointed to the holographic display showing a Drachnid neural pattern. "Their brains work differently than ours," she said, keeping her words simple and clear. "They need a special kind of radiation to think properly. Without it, they become confused, like a radio losing its signal." Commander Stone leaned forward. "And we can block this radiation." "Better," John Carter said, stepping forward. "We can create an opposite wave that cancels it out completely, like noise-canceling headphones, but for their neural networks." Kevin brought up another display showing Earth's defense satellite network. "The problem is, we need to change all these satellites to make this work. And we have to do it before the main Drachnid fleet arrives." The room fell quiet as everyone looked at the number of satellites that needed modification, over 300 spread across Earth's orbit. "Impossible," someone muttered. "We don't have enough time or resources." "Actually, we do," Maria Rodriguez spoke up from the back of the room. The engineer had been quiet until now, studying the technical specifications. "The changes aren't that complex. We don't need new hardware, just a software update and a few simple physical modifications." Lieutenant Nash, who had just returned from another successful skirmish in the asteroid belt, studied the satellite patterns. "If we timed this right, we could catch their entire fleet in the effect at once. They'll never see it coming." "How long will it take?" Alice asked Maria. 3 days to write, and test the software update. Another week to modify all the satellites. Maria paused. But we'll need every engineer we can get, and we'll have to work around the clock. Alice nodded. You'll have them. I'll speak with Admiral Chen about pulling engineers from the defense line. She turned to Nash. Can you keep the Drachnid scouts busy that long? Yes, ma'am, Nash replied with a slight smile. They're starting to get frustrated with our hit-and-run tactics. Makes them sloppy. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Susan and John worked with the programming team, making sure the radiation pattern would affect Drachnid biology exactly as the ancient data predicted. Kevin coordinated with the satellite control teams, planning the precise timing needed for the network-wide update. Maria led the engineering efforts, organizing teams to modify the satellites in shifts. Some worked in spacesuits, making delicate adjustments to the satellite arrays. Others monitored from control rooms, running constant tests to ensure each modification was perfect. The work was dangerous. 2 engineers were injured when a Drachnid patrol got too close to their worksite. But no one complained. No one quit. They all knew what was at stake. On the 6th day, as Maria checked the progress numbers, she allowed herself to feel real hope for the first time. Over 200 satellites had been successfully modified, and the rest were ahead of schedule. Commander, she called Alice on the ship's comm. We're going to make it. The whole network will be ready 2 days before the Drachnid fleet arrives. Alice's voice came back tired but determined. Good work, everyone. But don't celebrate yet. We still have to make sure it works. She paused. And we'll only get one chance to test it. As if to emphasize her words, the ship's alert system suddenly blared. Lieutenant Nash's voice came over the general comm. Drachnid battle group detected entering the inner solar system. They're moving faster than we expected, a lot faster. Susan looked at John and Kevin, then at the satellite status display. They had modified most of the network, but not all of it. Now they had to decide. Wait until everything was perfect, or use what they had ready and hope it would be enough. Commander Stone stood in the ESS Defiance war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching Drachnid battle group. They had detected 15 ships, far more than expected for an advance force. They're not just testing our defenses anymore, Lieutenant Nash said, pointing to their formation. This is a serious attack. Maria Rodriguez rushed into the room, her work uniform stained with grease. Commander, we've modified 243 satellites. The remaining ones won't be ready for another 3 days. We don't have 3 days, Alice replied, studying the enemy ship's approach vector. How much coverage do we have with the satellites we finished? Maria pulled up a map of Earth's orbital defense network. About 70% of our planned coverage area, but there are gaps, especially over the southern hemisphere. Susan Martinez and John Carter joined them, carrying tablets filled with simulation data. The modified satellites are working perfectly in our tests, Susan reported. But we've never tried this on actual Drachnid ships. Alice walked around the holographic display, her mind racing. The Drachnids thought they were pushing their advantage, but their aggression might be exactly what humanity needed. What if we used their own tactics against them? She said suddenly. They always attack in waves, hitting the strongest point of our defense first to show their power. And they always come from the same direction, Nash added, catching on to her thinking. North to south, following Earth's magnetic field lines. Alice nodded. Maria, can you move some of our modified satellites to fill the gaps in the northern coverage area? Leave the southern gaps for now. Yes, but that would leave the southern hemisphere almost completely exposed, Maria warned. Exactly, Alice said. Lieutenant Nash, send a message to all civilian ships in the southern sectors. Tell them to power up their engines and make lots of noise. I want them to look like they're panicking and trying to evacuate. Understanding dawned on the others' faces. The Drachnids were proud warriors who loved to demonstrate their superiority. They would never be able to resist such an obvious target. Over the next 12 hours, they'd put their plan into action. Civilian ships made clumsy, obvious attempts to flee the southern hemisphere, while Earth's remaining military vessels made a show of trying to protect them. "The Drachnids are taking the bait," Nash reported, watching their approach pattern. "They're adjusting course to attack the civilian ships first." "Of course they are," Alice said grimly. "They think we're weak and desperate. They want to show us how helpless we are to protect our own people." Maria worked with her engineering teams to carefully position the modified satellites, disguising them as normal defense platforms. Susan and John made final adjustments to the radiation frequencies, making sure they would affect the entire Drachnid battle group. As the alien ships moved closer, tension built on the bridge of the ESS Defiant. Everything depended on timing now. If they activated the satellites too early, the Drachnids would detect the energy buildup and retreat. Too late, and the civilian ships would be in real danger. "Enemy fleet entering optimal range in 5 minutes, Nash announced. Alice looked at her crew, seeing the same mix of fear and determination on every face. "Send the evacuation signal to the civilian ships," she ordered. "But tell them to hold position for exactly 3 more minutes. Make it look like their engines are failing." The Drachnid ships moved closer, their weapons charging. They had no way of knowing they were flying into a trap, their own arrogance blinding them to the possibility that humanity could turn their greatest strength into a weakness. 2 minutes to optimal range, Nash called out. "Drachnid weapons are hot." Alice took a deep breath. Everything they had worked for came down to the next few moments. "Ready on my mark," she said quietly. "Let's show them what humans can do when hope is all we have left." The bridge of the ESS Defiant fell silent as the Drachnid ships entered the target zone. Through the main viewport, their massive vessels looked like dark stars against Earth's blue backdrop. The civilian ships beneath them appeared tiny and helpless, exactly as planned. "Drachnid fleet in position," Lieutenant Nash reported, his voice steady. "All ships are within the satellite network's range." Commander Stone watched the tactical display, waiting for the perfect moment. The Drachnid ships had spread out in their standard attack formation, weapons charged and ready to fire on the civilian vessels below them. 30 seconds, Maria Rodriguez said from her engineering station. Her fingers hovered over the controls that would activate the modified satellite network. "Power levels are optimal." Susan Martinez stood next to John Carter, both scientists watching their monitors intently. The simulations had worked perfectly, but this was different. This was real. "Enemy ships are powering up their main weapons," Nash warned. "They're targeting the civilian fleet." Alice took a deep breath. "All civilian ships, execute emergency jump on my mark." She paused for 3 heartbeats. Mark. The civilian ships suddenly fired their engines at full power, scattering in all directions. The sudden movement caught the Drachnids off guard, but they quickly began to adjust their targeting. "Now, Maria," Alice ordered. "Activate the network." Maria's hands flew across her console. Across Earth's orbit, 243 satellites activated simultaneously. There was no visible beam, no dramatic light show, just a precise wavelength of radiation designed to disrupt Drachnid neural patterns. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Drachnid ships continued their approach, their weapons still charged. Then the first ship began to drift. "It's working," Susan whispered, watching her readings. "Their neural patterns are destabilizing." One by one, the massive Drachnid warships began to drift off course. Their precise formation fell apart as their crews lost the ability to coordinate their actions. Weapon systems powered down as the aliens struggled to maintain basic functions. "All human ships, move in," Alice commanded. "Disable their engines, but do not destroy them. We want prisoners, not martyrs." The ESS Defiant led the charge, followed by the remaining Earth defense vessels. They moved through the drifting Drachnid fleet like wolves among sleeping bears, carefully targeting engine systems and weapons arrays. "Commander," Nash called out, excitement in his voice. "We're receiving similar reports from all over the system. The Drachnid scout ships, their patrol groups, They're all being affected. John Carter studied the incoming data. The radiation wave is propagating through space exactly as we predicted. Any Drachnid ship within 50,000 kilometers of a modified satellite is being neutralized. In less than an hour, it was over. The mighty Drachnid battle group had been captured without a single shot fired in either direction. Earth's ships moved among the disabled vessels, attaching tow cables and securing airlocks. Message from Earth Command, Nash reported. The main Drachnid fleet has been detected changing course. They're retreating from the solar system. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but Alice raised her hand for silence. Don't celebrate yet, she said, though she couldn't keep a small smile from her face. We've won this battle, but the war isn't over. The Drachnids won't stay confused forever. She turned to Susan and John. How long until they figure out what we did and find a way to shield themselves? Susan checked her calculations. Based on their technology level, at least 6 months, maybe more. Alice nodded. Then we have 6 months to free every world they've conquered and show the galaxy that humanity won't just survive. We'll help others survive too. She looked at Earth through the viewport, its blue surface no longer seeming quite so vulnerable. Send word to every human colony and outpost, she ordered. Tell them hope isn't lost. Tell them it's time to take the fight to the Drachnids. 6 months after Earth's victory, Commander Alice Stone stood in the observation deck of the ESS Defiant, watching the liberation of another Drachnid-controlled world. Below, the people of Centauri Prime celebrated in the streets as the last Drachnid ships retreated from their system. That makes 17 worlds freed in the past month alone, Lieutenant Nash said, joining her at the window. The tactical officer looked tired but satisfied. The Drachnids can't hold their empire together now that everyone knows their weakness. And how are our guests doing? Alice asked, referring to the Drachnid prisoners they had captured during the Battle of Earth. Dr. Martinez has made a breakthrough, Nash replied. You should see this. In the ship's science lab, Susan Martins and John Carter worked alongside several Drachnid scientists. The aliens look different now. Less threatening without their neural enhancement radiation, more willing to communicate and cooperate. Commander, Susan said as Alice entered, we've found something interesting. She gestured to a display showing Drachnid brain patterns. Their dependence on the radiation isn't natural. It was engineered into their species thousands of years ago. One of the Drachnid scientists, who had learned to speak English, stepped forward. Our ancestors were modified to be perfect warriors, she explained. The radiation enhancement made us stronger, faster, more aggressive. But it also made us slaves to our own biology. We're helping them develop a treatment, John added. A way to gradually eliminate their dependence on the radiation without harming their neural functions. Alice watched as human and Drachnid scientists worked together, sharing knowledge and solving problems. It wasn't the outcome anyone had expected 6 months ago. Maria Rodriguez entered the lab, carrying new satellite designs. After the Battle of Earth, she had been promoted to chief engineer of the entire defense fleet. The new satellite network is ready, she announced. We can deploy it to any world that wants protection from future Drachnid attacks. That won't be necessary, the Drachnid scientist said quietly. Our high command has sued for peace. Too many of our worlds have chosen freedom. The Empire is over. Kevin Wright, who had first discovered the ancient facility on Mars, looked up from his workstation. The real question is, what happens next? What do we do with all this knowledge we found? Alice thought about the past 6 months. Humanity had not just survived, they had changed the galaxy. Not through superior weapons or brutal conquest, but through science, cooperation, and the simple refusal to give up hope. We do what humans have always done, she said. We learn. We grow. We help others do the same. She turned to the Drachnid scientist. Your people don't have to be warriors anymore. You can choose what you want to become. The news arrived later that day. The Drachnid Empire had officially surrendered. Their worlds would be free to choose their own paths forward. Many had already asked to join the new alliance of free worlds, with Earth as a founding member. As celebrations broke out across human space, Alice returned to the observation deck. Earth was visible in the distance, a small blue marble that had changed the course of galactic history. Susan joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You know what amazes me," she said, handing one to Alice. "6 months ago, we thought we had no hope left. Now look at us. We're helping to build a whole new future." Alice smiled, remembering the desperate days before they found the Mars facility. "That's the thing about humans," she said. "As long as we're still breathing, there's always hope. And sometimes, that's all we need to change everything." Across the galaxy, a new era was beginning. The age of conquest was ending, replaced by an age of cooperation and discovery. And it had all started because a few humans had refused to give up when all hope seemed lost.